Welcome to the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast with psychologist Dr. Doreen Downing. Listen in as Doreen interviews people who felt they didn't have a voice or who suffered extreme speaking anxiety. You'll hear stories about how they struggled to speak up, what they did to find their authentic voice, and the confidence they now feel to speak up and make an impact. If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. And now, here is Doreen.
Hi, this is Dr. Doreen Downing, and I'm here today with the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast. And I'd like to welcome all of our listeners today. I have a new friend I get to introduce you to. I've met her through a mindfulness community that I belong to, and it's always so satisfying when you meet somebody who knows the language of these deeper realms, this inner world and this terrain that's within us. So today I'm introducing you to Denise Blanc. Hello, Denise.
Hi, Dr. Doreen.
Oh,
Is that how you like to be called? What do you like to be called?
I love my name, Doreen. So if that's fine with me. So you sent me a bio, and I always like to do a little bit of that in the beginning. So at least we have a frame for where we're going, and we may start with where you started in your life, but here you are now. And so you said to me, Denise coaches, writes, and speaks at the intersection of emotional intelligence, conflict transformation, and mindful communication. She is the founder of River Logic Partners, a coaching and consulting firm that works with leaders and teams on issues of communication, conflict, and change. Hey, there are 3 C's there: communication, conflict, and change. I noticed that. Denise has been the chief architect of numerous leadership academies and the recipient of several awards for her leadership program and design. She is a student and teacher within Shambhala, a global Buddhist organization where she teaches programs on racial identity and justice. And Denise is the author of River Logic, Tools to Transform Resistance and Create Flow in All of Our Relationships. Oh, I'm taking a big, deep breath with that one. And I know that just me pointing to some of these things that you do already, and especially this book, the whole idea of creating flow in all of relationships, I'm sure people perked up their ears.
Or raise their eyebrow?
Well, they're saying, who is she? I know, I want to get to know you. This is one of our first conversations. Well, actually, we had a conversation before, but this feels like it's more about, hey, Denise, tell me more about who you are and how you got to be the way you are. And usually, as I do here, is to wonder about your early life. That's my business, is psychology, and that's a frame that we come into, and it's an initial kind of, well, here you start to realize who you are in that frame. So anything you could say about that?
Yeah, well, as I was thinking about your podcast and your frame, um, I did some reflecting and realized that growing up, I grew up with a dad that I thought of as God. I mean, my dad was everything to me. And he was just smart and kind and competent in the world, but he was a certain kind of guy. He was really good in math and um, science and mechanical things. And I identified all the things that he was as what smart looked like. That's what smart was. And since I wasn't really any of those things, I when I was little, I just didn't think I was smart. And and that really affected me in terms of confidence and being in the world. Um, as I was growing up, I mean, my interest was always in sort of the inner. I could
Mhm.
see people. I didn't have language for it.
Mm.
I didn't understand it. It also was the areas that got me in trouble. I had a turbulent relationship with my mother, and I would often be able to see kind of inauthentic behavior. So when the behavior didn't match the words and smiles were not authentic, I reacted. And that kind of reaction was challenging between the two of us. So I had this kind of inner knowing without a language for it. I was a word person. Um, and but I wasn't, I didn't relate to numbers. I didn't actually like them very much. And so anyway, that kind of created a certain kind of lower self-esteem, I think, for me in terms of confidence in the world and what I was capable of doing. So
Mm.
that was like the early years.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to get a snapshot, which it feels like you just gave us. And um, when you were talking about your dad, it felt like there was a lot of admiration that came through when you smiled about him. And then, of course, mom was a different story, and she had whatever she brought to her parenting. And she was a little probably well, you're saying inauthentic. So what would be an example of something that you might see and how you might react with her?
Well, I think my mom really was trying very hard to control. And I was a little bit of a wild child, so that was not easy, a job for her. She really liked, I mean, she's growing up in the 50s, and she just liked her house to be really neat. She liked all her children, she had 4 children, to be well dressed. She was a fashion plate, so all the pictures, we are decked out. Now, I can imagine that took a lot to manage because my dad was working all the time. So I was really the tomboy, like climbing trees, always had a skin knee and, had really curly hair. Just, it was hard to control it. And I was always trying to make my hair sort of like be manageable, but it I was never successful. And so her attempt to control me, I think was a big part of our challenging times with each other.
What a metaphor. The curly, hair that's probably got a lot of energy, that's what it feels like, that it represents not only the outer you, but there was some, a lot of energy inside is what I get from you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wrote about my mom. I mean, I thank goodness that I was able to repair a lot
Mhm.
between
Mhm.
my mom and I before she died. So
Mm.
that I have just, I have no bitterness or anything, but it was explosive growing up. That was just the feeling energetically.
Yeah, and when I talk to people here on the podcast, it seems like that whatever has happened in the past plays a significant part in the future, like what you said, explosive. There's something. I know where we're going. So, listeners, Denise does work with conflict, resolution. So, that whole idea of explosiveness and being in the midst of it, it wasn't like a smooth sailing, free flowing family life. There was an element in that early lifestyle that had explosion in it. And that's what? What are you saying?
I'm First of all, I'm just loving this little linkage that you're making between my mom and the
Uh-huh,
work of conflict work, which I have not made that link. So
uh-huh,
that
uh-huh.
smile is kind of like, yeah.
Mm, yeah. Ooh, it's in your DNA, or no, well, whatever you came into the world, but it was also what this life chose for you to learn to do the thing that you're doing now. And we'll get to that in a few minutes because I love your approach to conflict resolution. But I want to just go a little bit further into, not that early, because I think we got enough of a snapshot of that, but high school, what was that like?
Well, I went to a high school that was primarily gentile. Where I grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago, it wasn't so much about black, white in our suburb. It was Gentile Jew. There were very few people of color in our neighborhood community. And so my growing up was at the high school level. It was a wealthy community where people were going, the girls were becoming going to cotillions, which is, this kind of debutante thing. And they were blonde, blue-eyed, long-limbed, rowers, tennis yeah. And so my experience in high school was sort of, now I have this language because I do this diversity work. It's really this feeling of being othered, which I don't even think I've ever said that, but that really was true. I mean, the Jewish boys were accepted and invited to the cotillions, but the Jewish girls were not. So there was we felt outside of. And so there was that experience of feeling unattractive, not fitting whatever the standard of beauty I thought was. And so, and the challenging quality I had in my home with my mom. So those were not easy. I mean, my best friends were the sanity. And so high school was, and I went to a high school that was considered one of the best high schools in the country. We were always told. So many people were going Ivy League. That was a huge focus. And I had no interest in that. And so it wasn't wonderful. My high school experience was not wonderful. And I remember thinking, I cannot wait to go. I was like really wanting to go where it was wild, west. Go west, young woman.
There's that wild hairdo. Yes.
Yeah, I applied to University of Texas, University of Arizona, University of Colorado. It was like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's where I was off to.
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about voice, and I'm also looking at and opening up to the idea, well, obviously there was something about the conflict that you must have had to, you said that there's maybe some repercussions. And did you feel like you spoke up and it wasn't heard? Did you speak up and slap down? Did you?
Well, I think in the early years, it was more combustive. Later, I think my mom would describe me just kind of giving her looks. Like
Mhm.
I think it was probably like it's just an evil eye. I think she felt very judged by
Uh,
me,
uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
so
Well,
I was
when people are trying to hide something and you are more of an observer and can see through, I can sense that she probably felt that you were seeing through her and was uncomfortable.
yeah. So I feel sad now when I look back. I
Mm.
feel sad that I was like a brat, and
Oh.
And
Uh-huh.
that yeah, that my mom really, I mean, as you develop empathy, she really wanted and needed something from me that she did not get. And my younger sister and I, who shared a room, were like each other's person. And so we had almost like each a secret language. We laughed and played and and there was an exclusion with my older sister and my mom. I think they felt excluded from this little
Uh,
inner circle that we
yeah.
had.
This private fairyland.
Yeah, and I would do all this work like later in college, really thinking, "Oh, I've really forgiven my mother." I remember saying, "I really need a mother." I remember inviting her for a weekend when I was later living in Minnesota, and then she would arrive in her outfits and her dyed red hair and her intensity, and I'm like, I was not evolved enough to actually have accepted this mother, and so the same behavior would happen. And,
Mhm.
it was yeah, I wanted a mother, but not you.
Oh, this is so amazing to hear you have this opening to us today and to be so forthcoming and self-disclosing. I really, really appreciate the moments that you're sharing with us.
Well, thank you. No one's really asked me these questions, so this is all like really fresh. This is not
Yeah.
in the
Yes.
in the
And
moment.
that's why people are compelled by this podcast that I do, is because it goes in realms that aren't just traditional, where, oh, answer these 5 questions and, everybody answers the same questions. This is really fresh off the block. And I can tell you that so many of my guests have had that moment where, really, I never thought of it that way, like you did a second ago, about how it relates to your future as the what you're gifting the world now with, river logic and transformation. I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to come back to that. I'd like to move on to what you're doing now and how amazing it is, and the journey to there. So we'll take a quick break. Be right back.
If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com.
Hi, we're back with Denise Blanc, and already opening up avenues of exploration that are brand new for most of your listeners, because we do go deep. We do dive into a person's history so that we can share that it hasn't always been easy. I mean, you see successful people out there. Here we have today an author of all things who's written a book, and she's talking about the challenges it was to find who she truly was and to feel comfortable and to find her voice. We're back, Denise.
Yes.
So you talked about moving out into the world, wanting to move west. And I know you live not far from me, and I'm in the West Coast. So you finally landed here. And without going into that particularly right now, let's just, the link between high school, college, and launching out into the world and finding who you are and how your voice showed up then.
Yeah. Well, I am what we call a seeker, which assuming you are as well. And so that kind of exploration, especially in the 70s, where it was exploding all around me. So whether, it's just starting to learn to meditate with transcendental meditation, the first book of awakening that for many of us in my generation was Ram Dass's Be Here Now. And that began something. I I was my final year undergrad was the same year that the Naropa Institute opened in Boulder, Colorado, where I was going to school. And Shoyam Trungpa, who's a lineage holder in the Tibetan path, who came to the US and started the Naropa Institute, taught a class that I took in my senior year, Introduction to Buddhism. And I was in that class. And now I did not get the transmission. He had this crazy wisdom, and there's a lot of kind of very controversial aspects of Trungpa, but the class had an effect on me. And I was on my own kind of search, the spiritual shopping kind of search, not like landing in one thing, but trying lots of different things. So had done transcendental meditation, and then I was doing Zen, and then I found my way eventually to Shambhala, which is the Tibetan path that Trungpa started. But through all that, I was a psychology major. I was really thinking of becoming a psychologist until I had a job for 4 years working as a psychological assistant in a rehab hospital in Chicago with a lot of psychologists who after a while, got on my nerves. I was learning
Mm.
how to do Rorschachs and TATs and all those things. And I just started becoming a yogi, a yogini. I got really, really interested in yoga and wanted to become a yoga teacher, which is what brought me to California, to
Oh,
study at the Iyengar Institute.
uh-huh.
And right when I came to California, JFK was opening, and I went to the open house of JFK and in the holistic studies department. And somebody gave me this woman, my friend Crystal, she led me in a practice of feeling my feet on the ground and bending my knees and putting my knees like like towards each other so that and just feeling the anchor. And
Uh-huh.
in a millisecond, I was grounded. I felt fully embodied and grounded, like after doing 3 hours of yoga. But this happened in a second. So that night, I signed up for graduate school at JFK just impulsively. And
Denise,
that
I want to interrupt you right now because those who can't see, because they're listening, I want to feedback that when you just did that, you did that sitting position with your feet, and it just felt like there was a centering that happened all of a sudden right here with me. So here we are in a brand new moment together. Nice.
so
Yeah.
that was when you look at moments in your life,
Mhm.
that was a moment that shifted a lot of things of me developing understanding of somatics and body and
Uh-huh.
and psychology. And so getting, that became a trajectory, a big time trajectory in my life.
Yeah.
But, I was being trained to sort of be a shaman in that program. And at the end of a program, um, I didn't really feel certainly ready for
Uh-huh.
that. And so then I actually went, okay, I need to actually get a job.
Uh-huh.
Who's going to hire me? And so that's when I started getting into organizational development, as a facilitator and doing trainings
Uh,
and working with a consulting firm and doing trainings all over the country and developing the skills as a facilitator, um, which really eventually moved into me running a department in a healthcare setting. And then realizing what I was really good at and people always saw is my ability to lean into hard conversations.
Oh, okay. I know that, but before we go to hard conversations with this, I remember what you said about observing as a young girl, that you could, and to me, that's what a facilitator does, is to be with a group and to be able to not only observe people individually, but observe the group itself. And I would imagine that's one of your gifts also that you bring nowadays to, or brought if you're still doing trainings. Anyway, I just wanted to feed that back
Yeah,
to you.
the ability to read the room or read
Mhm.
each other is a
Mhm.
really important competency.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And see, you had it naturally and now developed it in such a way you're teaching it or using it in a way that helps others learn how to really, like you said, first be still, and, or you didn't say it, but you've demonstrated it here, and to be with at the same time. Well, go on, lean into hard conversations.
Well, when you're in healthcare and you're running an education department, I mean, bottom line, most of the issues are really around conflict. A lot of the issues, anyway, are around conflict.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so I started designing and developing programs, many, and teaching them. Um, and so I had a good run of 8 years running a department, and then I got laid off. And I couldn't believe I got laid off because I had just created this leadership academy that won all these awards.
Oh,
But nobody is immune to layoffs.
uh,
And I thought, what can the state of California do for me? Beside, I got a very, very generous severance. But I discovered that they had retraining. Now, they wouldn't typically retrain somebody like me because I was making quite a bit of money and blah, but I worked the system and I got to get retrained in conflict resolution. So I went through all the hoops and so I got certified in conflict resolution and so began to do a deep study around that world
Uh-huh.
and read a bazillion books, and so that became another sort of stream for me, that, and it's a skill.
Uh-huh.
It's definitely a skill. So even though I seem to have sort of a natural skill, there's just honing it is what I started to do.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you said stream, so let's move on to your book, River Logic.
Yeah. Well, for any of you out there who are writing a book, one of the things you get to do is you get to put yourself in the book. You get to kind of write the book you want to write. And I have gone through so many trainings and I have so many streams in my life. And I would go to the Zen, the Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, which is in Santa Rosa. And I went 3 times with all my notebooks. And there's nothing there beside, I was staying in a beautiful room with a lot of cushions, and the Zen monks are very quiet. And I would bring my own food, and there's no Wi Fi. And I went through the process of distillation, like
Oh.
how to distill all
Uh-huh.
these different streams
Uh-huh.
that I had gone through around the somatic work and the facilitation and the leadership and the conflict work. And then there was the emotional intelligence that we haven't talked about. But so those, it's like, how did that all fit together in a book? And I had named my company 10 years when I got laid off. I decided to start my own consulting firm and I named my business River Logic Partners after hearing something from Pema Chodron, the Buddhist teacher, who talked about sometimes we have rock logic. She described it where we're really rigid, like a rock,
Mm.
immovable, fundamentalists in our thinking, and sometimes we're more like what she called water logic, where we're fluid and adaptable. And I loved it, and I just played with the words, and I came up with River Logic Partners. And I spent 10 years blogging. Like I probably did 25 blogs on what is river logic to me and to my
Mhm.
work. And then naively thought it could be a book. And then had never written a book, but took me 6 years to write the book. But the book is really the distillation of all these different streams, no
Uh-huh.
pun intended,
Mhm.
and how the river as a metaphor kind of instructs us and inspires us to go from this idea of rock logic, rigid, to more flow. How do we do that?
Mhm.
Like, what are the tools?
Mhm.
What what are the principles involved? And so each chapter has a river word and is a principle.
Mhm.
So it's in some ways fairly simple, but as we know, this work is not simple.
Yeah. But I think what you're saying is that the flow idea is something our bodies want. I get the feel in myself that flowing either through the day or flowing through a conversation. And then when the blocks happen or the stress happens, then there's not flow. And it feels like your book is talking about bringing us back to some principles. So name one of the ones that you would say you'd like to
Well,
before we.
foundationally, it
Uh-huh.
begins with the first one, which is choose to be present. And we have a culture that doesn't support presence, but we have a whole like plethora of mindfulness programs happening everywhere because there's a huge need for presence. But I talk about all the things that get us off center, which is, this hurry culture
Yeah.
is really intense. It's really hard to be present when we're feeling pressured and overwhelmed or exhausted. Digitally, we get, we're just overwhelmed by just the kind of digital stimuli. And then there's the mind, what we know, the monkey mind, where we are very distracted by the plethora of thoughts that are going on. So those are just like three things, but choosing to be present is kind of like, without that, it's really hard to do anything further. So that is, and the second one, and I'll just stop there, but is listen with heart and curiosity. And the world of listening is so incredibly rich.
Yeah.
There's listening to other, there's listening underneath, there's listening within, there's listening to the environment. Listening has just a wide range, and so many skills are embedded in that quality of listening that people think, oh, I know how to listen.
Mhm. Already, just when you talk about listening, I know I go into and I'm remembering how to be with you even right now and listening more deeply, more fully. And I feel a fascination as you talk. And I think, hey, listeners out there, don't you just feel fascinated and you just drawn into what Denise is saying about river logic? And if you want to know more, we're going to quickly end pretty soon here. So I want to make sure that we open up a space for you to say where they can learn more about you and your book and your work.
Yeah, probably the easiest spot is to just get online and riverlogictools.com, and you can purchase the book. Once a month, I'm putting together river logic tips. And I'm using these river words because the river words are starting to be really accessible to people. Like we know what flow feels like.
Yes.
Um, so when we hit the rapids, like
Uh-huh.
what is that? And how do we deal when we're in the rapids? So I give some tips. So
Yeah.
I'm calling the rapids the turbulence, when it starts to we feel the resistance.
Uh-huh.
The tip of March was about undercurrents.
Uh-huh.
So we feel something going on between us, but it's not being said. We're tuning. We're probably seeing it in tiny micro movements. Something's not in sync, which is what was going on with me and my mom a lot. There
Yeah.
was these undercurrents that would drive me crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm describing how do we name the undercurrents and how do we like be in relationship with somebody if they're willing to. Anyway, the river words are becoming really my favorite kind of conflict words because instead of saying we're in conflict, if we said, "W- it seems like we're heading for the rapids here.
Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
what do we need to do?
Yeah. Yeah. We're in the midst of turbulence. Let's that awareness, I think, and that being conscious and present. Well, excited to spend more time with you. I know we're developing a friendship and to talk about these ideas more. I love listening. I love presence. Those who are with me on this podcast know that that's what this work is all about, is finding the voice from within that has that kind of flow you're talking about. And then what happens when it runs into stress, which is turbulence. So, well, we're at the end, and you've said riverlogic.com. Is that where you said people find you?
Tools.
River Logic Tools. Okay, thanks. And big breath. How about some final words that come through you right here, right now? Just opening up the space to listen into this now moment after being together.
Well, I have a quote that I created for my book, which I think is such an important one, which is the quality of our presence, the quality of our communication is only equal to the quality of our presence. The quality of our communication is only equal to the quality of our presence. So that's
Um,
an aspiration.
yeah, well, I think that pinpoints for me why I'm drawn to you and why this conversation has been something I've looked forward to, and that quality of presence, and then the communication that comes from both of us being really committed to being with each other and present and open and listening. And as you mentioned a book, Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and the idea is to be here now. So in our communication. Thank you so much, Denise.
Well, thank you, Doreen. It's just been totally provocative for me.
Good. Big hugs.
Big hugs.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being with us today for this episode of Find Your Voice, Change Your Life. Each person Doreen interviews shares what has helped them find their voice. You can learn from these guests and find your voice so you can be confident to speak up and speak out. And remember to download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. We hope you enjoyed the show and will return next time. Until then, goodbye for now.